Hey,
How you doing?
I'm good.
You
I'm
know
good.
this is an honor, right?
No, this is an honor for me. Really,
Yeah,
this is
it's
very, very cool. Just having a time to spend with you yesterday, where you started everything off and took me to a tour of your hood, of your neighborhood, and just around was just so amazing. And I got a deeper insight into who you are and the sort of story behind this incredible brand that you've launched, which part of this comes and ties into this topic that we have.
absolutely.
Okay, so I want to repeat this so you know what we're about to go into. So our topic is Black brand, Black money, and Black power, and why spending with Black businesses matters. And so you got one of the blackest brands that I've seen. It really
Black.
has the word Black inside of the name.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I want to ask you, well, what did that mean for you to do that? And like, tell me a little bit more about Black owned.
Well, I think most of us, growing up at a young age, we don't have much. But what we can do is express ourselves through clothing, which for a lot of African Americans, if you're connected to the hip hop community, that's your thing. You know, you may not have a big house, you may not have, your family may not have the car, may not have the wealth, but to present yourself in a way that other people will, respect or like it, it's big to us. So that's where it all started at a young age, just, being able to pick my own clothing out. And growing up in the neighborhood, you can pretty much get into anything growing up in downtown Cincinnati. But I knew that I wanted to do something else for myself because I saw where that path led most of my friends. So clothing was their outlet. Music was their outlet. Those two things, they go together. They work hand in hand. Hip-hop culture and fashion has always worked hand in hand, which is why you have big brands like Gucci and Louis. They're constantly targeting our demographic. So as I grew on, I started my first clothing line in high school, and it did really well. But then it fell off like most brands. And then once I got to college, my experience at Miami, it was what they call a culture shock. So if you can only imagine growing up in downtown Cincinnati in an all-black community and then finding my way in Oxford. And the first time that I actually went to Oxford was on my orientation day. So I didn't even get the opportunity to visit Miami for, you go to campus and check it out. I didn't do those things. It was kind of a last-minute decision, which is crazy because Miami is an awesome school. But while there, I lost myself. To be honest, what I started to tell myself is that if I wanted to get ahead in life, that I had to become white or take on their practices. And it wasn't until around my junior year that I realized that it was my job to actually teach them about my culture so that once they left Miami, that they would, have a better experience in dealing with black people, black men in particular. So those experiences and coming out of Miami just really cultivated this idea for a new fashion brand. And, I really realized in my last years that I wanted to leave a mark. And I really became like blacker than black. I was already black, but I really wanted people to understand that I wasn't afraid of who I was anymore.
Yeah.
And it took me some time. But then once leaving Miami, I was in New Orleans for a bit, which we talked about. And I realized how rich the culture was and how black it was in New Orleans. And I came back home with this idea that I wanted to enrich my city with black culture, something that I never really felt in the city of Cincinnati outside of Derek Turnbow, where I was born, where you can look and see African Americans, but there was no wealth to that. But we spend a lot of money on fashion. As you know, top 3 things I think for African Americans: baby products, hair products, and clothing. So it made sense for me with a marketing degree to use what I wanted to share with the ones that were coming behind me and use fashion to be the vehicle for that. And here we are.
Yeah, perfect.
8 years later with the brand Black Owned. So yeah, I mean, it's really, it's less about the clothing and about the fashion. It's really more so about how it makes us feel.
Right.
Because how you feel about yourself plays a big part in what you're going to do in life. If you don't feel like you have an outlet, or if you don't feel like there's anything out there for you, then those are the decisions that you will make.
Right.
You may not consider, if I make this decision, I lose everything. because you don't value anything. But if you look at yourself and know that ownership is in your future, then it's more likely that that's where you'll take your path.
It was one of the things that really struck me. I asked you this question when we were at your shop, and I said, okay, so you've told me a little bit about what it meant to you to really step into your identity and own who you are and really show people this is who I am and where I come from. But what did it mean for the community? What did it mean for the people? And you showed me this photograph of these young men who all had on your clothing, and they were standing up looking real strong, real proud. And you started to explain a little bit more about what that meant for everybody else to see it. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think media does a crappy job of portraying our talents, one, what we're capable of. I think I'll stay on top because I know our time is brief. For me, what it meant was an opportunity to step out there and do what nobody else really wanted to do because they didn't want the backlash. And when we first created our brand, we were receiving mail from people. We were reading the articles that were out there about us, all the bad things that people had to say about this brand, Black Owned. And I was kind of confused because I'm thinking to myself, everyone said, they're so racist. And in my mind, I'm like, actually, you're racist because what is the issue with anything being Black owned? So the issue was within the people that had. So I wanted to just jump out there and just put it out there in the front that this is who I am. And I really felt that everyone in America, even people that move from other countries to America are welcomed in. We embrace their culture. I often use the most simple form is Chipotle. We love Chipotle. It's Chipotle Mexican grill. And no one ever questioned, why can't it just be a grill? But for us, it was like, you have a clothing line, why does it have to be Black owned? Because this is my culture, this is who I am, and I want you to feel how rich this is. So it was never about excluding anyone, it was more so about bringing us, closer. And no one really wanted to take that step, but I knew that my experiences at Miami, that the rest of the world was dealing with a similar experience of trying to get away from who we are, and I wanted Black people to know that what we have to offer not even what we have to offer, what we've been offering, that we're not compensated for, is very valuable and it's important. And now, 8 years later, I think people wear Black owned and they're proud, and we just recently launched a new campaign, which is the Family Reunion. Because for our brand, it feels like when you see someone, if you don't know them, immediately that's a relative, that's a family member, because you see that Black on and you're like, okay, I know what you own. And the more you see that, once again, we're back to that feeling of, oh, it's other people out there just like me. And you don't have to be afraid. And so when people wear our brand, once again, it's like, yeah, I feel dope in my Black on. It's a nice piece. But more so than that, I just joined a community that says that we are going to support one another and we're going to duplicate this concept and we're going to be very wealthy because of it. And there's nothing wrong with that.
So in my work, I am a lender to majority Black businesses. I think I might have the largest portfolio of companies invested in Black businesses right now, and growing, yay, to my team. And so one of the things, and I put it right out there straight up, like, no, we're doing capital, we're doing Black money, we're actually intending to do this. And it's for the same reason. In the beginning, people were like, maybe you don't want to limit yourself, or my favorite thing was, how do you know that they actually need that money? And I was like, what? Have you read any data ever? But what I was really also trying to get into was this piece of the feeling of what it means to actually be an owner, to own yourself, to have agency of yourself and the places where you're going, and to be able to direct those narratives from your lens, not inside of the lens of this sort of oppressive, culture and system inside of that. And so for me, it was a big deal to actually very much name what we were doing. But more importantly, it was important for me to name Black because I needed to get proximate to get to a real solution. So often in finance and capital, in the particular place where I work, we talk about things like, I don't know if you've heard this term, the wealth gap. I personally just don't love the term, but the racial wealth gap. But at any rate, and it really just sums up this whole list of a lot of things that has happened in our systems that have created a gross amount of extraction and inequity. And they have racialized outcomes. And so when I'm sitting there and I'm talking about this, people would say, well, African American businesses need access to capital. Absolutely. They need technical supports. They need business training and support, and they need access to the marketplace. These are going to be the three things. It doesn't matter what city you're in. I'm going to hear the same three things. I hate to, let everybody know it's actually the same thing everywhere. And but what would tend to happen is that on the part where they would talk about access to capital, nobody could really distinguish between an SBA loan, whether or not somebody was going to get venture capital, angel investment, whether this was a private equity deal. They had all of this sort of capital kind of like in one bucket moving around. And people would say, well, this business, isn't really a great business. They're not prepared to receive this capital. But nobody really looked at this data that we had that talked about this wealth gap and overlaid it with the question around what kind of capital people needed. And if you did, you would notice that this particular startup money, which they call friends and family rounds of capital, you couldn't get. And guess why you can't get it? Because your friends and your family don't have that kind of money. But being proximate, naming who I was actually targeting and what I was trying to do gave me a lens to actually understand what kind of capital and why it wasn't working versus this very sort of large thing that everybody kept saying, everybody needs access to capital, but what kind of capital, from whom? And when, and from whom also really matters. And we didn't get into that because friends and family capital comes with a lot of different stuff. It comes with, relationships and access to all these different things. And so who is getting all of that was also embedded inside of the success of those companies. And you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday on the capital front, because I always ask people, I'm like, tell me your startup story. You had one startup story for the outerwear piece, and then the Black coffee has another part of a story around access and capital and what was used, and they change a little bit inside of that. So what's been the capital journey?
Well, before I share that piece, you
did I bring up something that you were like, okay.
You brought up some really good points.
Because
what we're here for is to talk about why should we buy Black? Why Black brands? And the reason is so that we can move everyone out the way and we won't have to ask for capital, but we will be able to have our own capital. So I want to throw that out there. And there's a ways, that's going to take some time, but that's where we plan to get. And we talked about that as well. But when we launched the brand, we kind of bootstrapped ourselves. We started out the trunk of our car. That worked, which was crazy. We used Facebook only for all of our sales. And then we graduated from that, turned it into a storefront at some point, and that's when we realized we were still using our own capital. But then as we wanted to grow and market and add on team members, we didn't have the money to do it. And when we went to people to get money, there were all of these certifications as a clothing line that they wanted us to have. If you want money from us, you have to be certified this way, so that you can get in Macy's and some of the other big retailers. That was never our interest. We always wanted to be a boutique style because we felt like big retail was just like watered down. It wasn't really the thing for us. But there were so many different things that they wanted us to have that we, didn't know about. We're first generation owners. Our business acumen, what we knew about business, the professional side of it we didn't have, but we had the hustle and we had the following and we had a really strong product, but we didn't have anyone to believe in us. And we couldn't get money because of that. And we got no after no after no. And eventually we just got frustrated and said, you know what, forget it. We won't ask anyone for money. We'll just continue to bootstrap. But in doing that, you run into hardships, because the fact is, if you can't continue to market, even you still see McDonald's commercials today.
Right.
And they're one of the biggest food chains, if not the biggest food chain right now. So even as we grew, we wanted to market, but we've spent less than 1% of our funds on marketing, and the average is somewhere around 3%, 2%. So, and we're far less than that. We didn't have the staff, but to answer the question, we couldn't get money from any institution. One, retail was in a decline, and two, we're black. So, but we bootstrapped it, and we kind of got through these hardships. And like you mentioned, a lot of companies like ours end up being like these revolving startups, because you can't get capital. So even at year 5 or year 8, you're still a startup because you're running like this.
That's right.
And that was a story for Black owned, and it still is. And once I put the idea out there that we were going to do Black coffee, I think a lot of people said, well, oh, this is the Black owned guy. It's a new venture. We didn't necessarily want to deal with him on clothing, but let's stick our name on the coffee shop, because that sounds like a better idea. So I think then you get people who want to, you know, show up and kind of want to put their name on your, on what you've worked for so long, and that was really hard on me. But I knew that it was important to do it, because I still wanted to show the people that were watching it it's possible.
Right.
So we did take on loans, and thankful for other, you know, Black organizations like Mortar, who stepped in, and GCMI, some guys over there who had interest in the coffee shop, and we were able to get that going. But capital is very, very hard to raise if you don't have a lot of experience, one, which a lot of us don't have, but that doesn't mean that our product isn't a good one. And cool. But yeah, just to answer your question, as far as capital is concerned, we haven't always had the best opportunities to receive capital. Whether that, if you go to a bank, they ask, well, what kind of collateral do you have? Well, we don't have any collateral. We don't own anything. And then, like you said, if you look at the data, it'll tell you that the wealth just isn't there in most cases. So we didn't have any collateral, and that kind of prevented us from getting capital. Yeah. So now we're changing that narrative as we say, okay, well, we need to own the building that we're in. So we take those steps, and then once you do that, but think about how long that can take. And in that time frame, a lot of Black businesses fail.
That's right.
So what can we do for one another to assist? We can spend with each other, because we can establish wealth, we can recycle the wealth, because the companies that we spend with, they get rich off Blacks. Well, spending power is 1.2 trillion. Everyone knows that for African Americans. But those companies, their number one interest isn't the Black community. So they're not putting the money that they get from us into our communities so that we can see a better way out. Right. And in recycling that wealth and establishing that wealth, we also want to create a pipeline. We all don't want to play ball, believe it or not. Some of us have, you know, other aspirations, like myself. Although I was a ball player, I always thought I can be more as a businessman from very early on. And but yeah, so I think establishing that wealth, recycling the wealth, creating a new community. I don't think we necessarily need a seat at the table. I think we create our own. Yeah. And there's absolutely really no issue in that. I think America, you said this, I think yesterday maybe, but America is ours. We built the country, free labor. So when I hear people say, you know, I'm not American, I ain't with it. I'm American, you know, I'm here. This is where we've built. And although our heritage is not here, you know, we've still done a lot for this country, but we still get the least out of the bucket. Yeah. And the only way to fix it is through ownership. Yeah. Because ownership creates wealth, it changes your vision, changes your feeling. And it creates a dynamic around people that says that this is my duty. Yeah. And I think that idea isn't there right now, that it's my duty to spend with other Black entrepreneurs or just to spend with Black entrepreneurs. But that's changing. I'm starting to see more and more on social media about how good it makes people feel to spend with someone who looks like them, and knowing that when you spend that money with Black-owned, we're damn sure going to do something in our community that betters the whole group.
Yeah. One of the things that I found is that the companies that we support, they don't necessarily broadcast this, but they're going to be really looking at their supply chain and making sure that that it is fair and equitable and just inside of that. They are going to be hiring formerly incarcerated people. They're going to be situating themselves in community, putting buildings back into good usage. So this whole idea of you want a really better, robust community, I think it really starts with seeing these entrepreneurs that look like you, that are putting out brands that feel very powerful, that feel very prideful, that money and capital are from the places where we're spending, but also from the investment places where we're putting in it. We're very intentional about really being a part of shaping those kind of contexts and situations. So, and we have 10. I thought you were saying 5. Oh, so wait a minute. So now you get to ask me some stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. I was trying to hurry up because I'm like, but now let me settle in and tell y'all all the business. Okay. All right.
So another thing because I do have a question for you. I wanted to add something to my last point about spending Black crime rates. When people feel better about themselves, when people have money in their pockets, they're establishing wealth, their life is good, crime rate goes down. So I wanted to say that because that's one of the things that they always bring up about the crime rate and Black-on-Black crime. Well, if you have nothing, you can't eat, you don't have a place to sleep, you don't know where your next meal is coming from, no one loves you, that's what happens. And yesterday you brought up, I got really excited when we were sitting down in the coffee shop just talking about your work, because the first half of my life went nothing like this. It wasn't often that I met affluent, Black, beautiful, strong, bold people. Yes.
This is taking a different turn of an interview here. Continue.
Yeah. But that's true. I grew up around genuine people, which is good. But to meet someone like you and your work is directly for people that look like us. And I was excited because once I asked you about your work, you told me about some of the stories. So I guess a question that I would have for you is, and I asked you this yesterday, but I'm going to bring it back up so we can share it with the group, is even when we can't get capital, because in a lot of cases, you can't serve every business that you would like to. I'm sure you would like to serve more. But even when you can't get capital, what do you think are the biggest advantages or the number one things that we should be taking advantage of as entrepreneurs to get ahead until we get capital, until we do have access to capital? And I think a lot of us want to know that.
Yeah. We do need access to capital, but there are other forms of capital, and this is what I was talking about yesterday. So there's social capital. So that's the stock of all of our relationships that we have with each other. There's political capital, and that might be in the form of civic participation or organizing or movement work, or you're actually in, a sort of politicalized space, government or something like that. We may have relationships in those kind of places. So soft P, small p political, and big P political. There's also, I think, intellectual capital, information that people just that really know about, how the thing works. Like you're talking about this really very rich relationship that you have socially in community, but also with your degree and what you've learned about how to market your particular products. That's a lot of intellectual capital that we can start to barter and trade with each other. And what I do notice about a lot of entrepreneurs that can make it past the capital shortages in the beginning is that they're really thoughtful about linking up with each other and utilizing the capital that they do have. The frustrating part about it is that it's always this race where you are running all the time. So you're trying to build the business, but then you got to think about, how do I get around this and how do I get around that? And then spend so little time actually doing the job of running the business, because now you got to out here maneuvering and raising money and trying to figure out. So it is tying one arm behind the back and trying to get some of this done, because a lot of businesses, I ask people all the time, it doesn't matter who it is, tell me your startup story. And I can hear from white men in particular, some of their startup stories that I have had the privilege of listening to came with a lot more stuff than a lot of other people's startup stories. And it's not just blanketly white men, but there is a glaring difference in the data of my informal data research here, where they got not only a little capital push, of maybe 10,000 or whatever it is in some extended period of time to pay it off or what have you, but they also got access to, hey, come and put your office in our building, or we're going to sit on your board, or I'm going to put somebody onto this particular position and help you out, or I'm going to get you one of your first contracts. Those kinds of things, that actually isn't capital all the time, like the financial capital, but that's the other stuff that I do think we can be much more aggressively thoughtful around how we support each other in getting to that. So, yeah.
Besides capital, because we talked about that a decent amount, what do you believe that black businesses should focus on most in their startup phase? And it's a similar question, but different. I know, not asking per se what other things can we do until we get capital, but what should be our focus?
Yeah. I love the businesses that are just like so specifically themselves, like where they are building like a cultural story and narrative that is drawing community in. And I think there's a shift that I see happening more and more, where we talked about the idea of this conscious consumer moving up. And I think when I look at this $1.2 trillion black buying power, then you also have inside of that a group of conscious consumers. Maybe not so much when it comes to that chicken sandwich, but there is another group of folks that is, doing this, who are thinking about, well, where am I spending my money? How does this impact us? How does it make me feel? They may, they may be thinking, I really want to buy, food from this particular grocer or this, this particular restaurant because that's a black-owned restaurant and they make the best, and shout out to Detroit. Davita's not here, but every time I go to Detroit and I look at all the food-based businesses, I am constantly going to the sweet potato pie place and all of the places. So I want to be inside of a community. And I think what we do get access to when we have those entrepreneurs that are building a brand that really talks about who we are and talks about a community that we can be a part of, as you mentioned, when you see, the person wearing that shirt on, it's like, cousin, what's up? That, I think, is where I would spend the most time really investing in our business, because we know that about each other. And I think part of what is inside of this question for me is we're often asked to operate, and I'm often asked to operate inside of a situation and a condition that was never built for us. So there are a lot of rules inside of this that actually are ridiculous and don't even work for us. And I'm really more interested to entrepreneurs who really use that entrepreneurial energy and spirit and as like constantly creating and making a new way forward. Because those kinds of things, when it reaches that customer, when it reaches that community, and it tells a story that's nostalgic about who we are and and aspirational about where we want to go, they do well, period. And that's what excites me. Those are the businesses that I'm going to be saying yes to over and over and over again.
And speaking of community, and that's what I think, in millennials, our desire is to be a part of a community, which is why Facebook, Twitter, Instagram is so popular, because they're all communities. The more we spend with black brands, the more we remove this stigma that if you support black or if you're pro-black, you're anti-white. Because you meet the black-owned guy, you don't know what to think. Like, is he like this Black Panther, like just really black, guy? And yes, I am. I'm not Black Panther, but I am really black. But then again, I went to Miami, so it's this idea that you can't be both.
Yeah.
And you absolutely can be both.
Yeah.
You can be about your people. You can want to preserve your culture. And those things are natural to me. And I think the more we spend and the more we create these communities, it'll be taken on better by our white counterparts. That it's not an anti-white movement. It's just that we want to have a lasting legacy as well.
Right.
And it gets interesting because we talked a little bit about this as well, is how do you think, and we're down to our last minutes.
Okay.
But as this change happened, we talked about in 2053, black wealth hitting zero, which is really scary. And I also read something not too long ago that there are more black businesses created now than ever before, but we're spending with each other less, which didn't make sense. How do you think, as we move forward, as we get closer to 2053, what do we need to do as black people, black brands, to make sure that we don't hit zero? What is our steps? And I think that's a good place to live.
Yeah, I would say, you know, the end part of this is to fall in love with yourself and your community. I mean, really, that's what the promise is, that of the capital that I'm putting out, of the brands that you're putting out, is to have the self-actualization and awareness to really love yourself, to have that self-love. It is not a panacea. It's not a fix-all kind of thing, and it feels sort of like out in the sky of what I'm saying. I can certainly give people tactical things. But larger than that, I think what we're looking for is to not over-romanticize and think we're going to get anything out of what has currently happened in the system. Like, we're trailing down to zero in wealth by absolute design. And because of that, I think it gives us another thing to do when we can say, well, what would it be if we could do it the way we really wanted to do it? What would it be? So inside of that is a deep amount of joy, celebration, and adventure that I think we need to start celebrating and leaning into as we design. But this is our design period right now, to say what we really want and to fully embody the self-love to know that you can get it. Yeah. And that is what I would leave people with. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you very much.